Sony's mobile ES lineup of speakers, head units, and amplifiers is continuing to grow. Their most recent additions as of May and June of 2023 included their double-din XAV-9000ES, that's a head unit which we reviewed, and of course what you see in front of here today, two new amplifiers, a 6-channel and an 8-channel. Hey everyone, it's Cameron back again with you from Car Audio Now, and today I'm excited to unbox and give you a close-up look of two of Sony's latest amplifier in their mobile ES lineup, the XM-6ES and the XM-8ES, both of which have a pretty impressive power output and some nice features to help installers and tuners really get the most out of their system and signal inputs. So what I'm going to do for you today is give you a close-up of these two brand new amplifiers. I'll unbox them and put all their components down on the table here to show you what they come with, and of course walk you through some of their core features. This review is really meant to give you an overview of these products rather than a technical dive of performance. Okay, let's start out by talking about some of the high-level specs of these two. First off, both of these are Class D amps. All of the amplifiers a part of the mobile ES lineups are Class Ds. On the left-hand side is the 6-channel, the XM-6ES. This amp will output 100 watts for each of the 6 channels at 4 ohms and 165 watts per channel at 2 ohms. So to put that into perspective, if you're interested in the broader lineup of products, let's say, and you wanted to power a set of Sony's XS-163ES, those are the 3-way 6.5-inch components that Sony has, you'll be in good shape powering 6 of them, no problem. With this amplifier. The 163ES handles 90 watts per component set at 4 ohms. Or another example here is their 6x9s, the 692ES, which handle 110 watts RMS. So pretty much a good option for all of the mobile ES lineup of speakers. You can also bridge 2 channels at one time to output a total of 330 watts for at 4 ohms. And you can obviously bridge the 6 channels 3 times, making 3 times 330 watts per channel, right? 3 channels at 330 watts. So you could power one of the mobile ES 4 ohm subs if you wanted as well, using one of these bridge channels, but it might be just a hair underpowered since the 124ES, that's the 12-inch mobile ES sub, is rated for 400 watts at 4 ohms. Still a very good option though. But if you were looking to do something like power 4 speakers and a 12-inch sub, I'd probably recommend the mobile ES 5-channel. That's the XM-5ES instead of the 6-channel here, especially if you're looking to power like a 2 ohm subwoofer, because when you bridge these channels, it'll output a minimum of 4 ohms. Okay, now on the right hand side, you have the 8-channel or the XM-8ES. I was actually pretty excited about this particular model because you can use it in so many different ways to power a system in your car. I'll get into that in more detail in a moment, but this puts out a similar output as the 6-channel here, but with 2 additional channels. It's 100 watts times 8 channels at 4 ohms, or 165 watts per channel at 2 ohms. And just like the 6-channel, you can bridge any 2 channels to output 330 watts at 4 ohms. You can do that for all 8 channels to output 330 watts times 4 channels if you wanted, or you could choose to bridge maybe 4 channels and then leave the other 4 channels unbridged. The choice is yours. And that's what I think I like so much about the 8-channel more than really any other amp for your bigger, more complex systems. One, you obviously have more channels, more power. If you wanted to have, let's say, 8 separate 6.5-inch component speakers, you could power all 8 of those component speakers very well. You could also do some other fun things like buy amp a two-way component system, or individually power Sony's 3-way system that I just mentioned for full tuning control, with other channels left over for some coaxials in the rear or something. Just for example, And two, having 8 separate channels that you can bridge could really open up the possibilities for powering subs. In addition to your speakers, you could leverage this amp to power a 6.1 setup, for example, a 4.2 setup, a 2.3, or you could just use it as a 4 subwoofer amplifier, since it has a low pass filters on each of the channel outputs, and I'll get into that. And obviously, you need to check the specs of the subwoofers that you would want to run here, because 330 watts might not be ideal for some of the high power 12-inch subs, but it could do well with some of the 10-inch or slim 12, slim 10-inch options out there. So the options are really vast. I would say with both of these amplifiers, with the bridging capabilities and the built-in crossover systems that I'll get into in a moment. So what I'm going to do for you next is start to unbox these amplifiers, and getting everything laid out on the table here so that you can see what comes in the box. I'm gonna go ahead and unbox the 8 channel for this. No sense in unboxing both and watching both of those. But then I'll put both components out on my test bench here and start to show you all the components included and walk you through some of their core features, inputs, signal summing, crossovers, etc. So let's get started. All right, here we go. Looks like you got your warranty, some mounting screws, and then your Allen wrench to pull off this control panel here, which I'll show you that in a moment. All right, I have both of these unboxed, as you can see. The 6 channel is at the top here, the 8 channel at the bottom. And the first thing you'll probably notice is that these 2 amplifiers, they share the same size chassis. They're on the same chassis, and they're both pretty compact. They're about 15 3/4 inches wide here by about 8 3/8 is what I measured tall here, and then 2 3/8 is the depth from top. That's the mounting depth here from top to bottom. All of the mobile ES amplifiers are on an aluminum chassis, so these included. That's pretty standard for amplifiers, but the one thing that Sony calls out about these amplifiers and the chassis in particular is their 1.2 millimeter thick bottom plate here that they've beefed up to be resonance dampening. My guess here is that by increasing the thickness of the frame and the bottom plate there, the more rigid the amps are going to be, and the more rigid the amps are, the less likely they are to be impacted by vibrations or frequencies that would otherwise have an impact on performance or the inner workings of the amp at high volumes. Now I've shifted these upright here to show you the signal inputs, the outputs, the powers, and the differences between these 2 amplifiers when it comes to this input-output panel. The components out of the box here, this is, by the way, this is all the components that this comes with. I showed you the limited warranty, the hardware. On the 8 channel, what I didn't show you is, and this is the biggest difference out of the box here, at least in terms of the components. The 8 channel comes with this dongle here, or this harness, and what this harness is an input harness. You can imagine 8 different RCA inputs and how much space it would take up on the amplifier here. You can see it firsthand on the 6 channel, where these are all the 6 channel inputs for the amplifier. So what Sony did is on this 8 channel, instead of putting all the RCAs on the panel here, they used an input harness that'll take all of the 8 RCA channel inputs from your signal source, like your head unit, your DSP or inline signal processor, and instead of placing them directly on the face of the amplifier, you're going to use this plug. You're going to plug your RCAs into this, and then you're going to plug the harness directly into the 8 channel amplifier right here, and it just takes up a lot less space. So I mean, you can see it here. It just wouldn't fit if they did the same setup here. And my assumption is that they wanted to keep both of these amplifiers contained to the same chassis. It's cheaper that way. There's efficiency from a production standpoint. But they probably also wanted to keep it compact. Now, you know, the 8 channels is the same size as the 6 channel, so there's benefits there. That's just my guess. The amp would have had to have been on a larger chassis if they would have tried to put the same style RCA input on the 8 channel as they did on the 6 channel and the rest of the amplifiers on their lineup, instead of using this amplifier input harness. Set this down. Now, the panels themselves, the input and the output panels themselves, aren't too different from the majority of the amplifiers on the market, but I'll go through a couple things here. On the far left, you're going to see, and this is the 6 channel input voltage, and it's also right here on the 8 channel. This is going to be used, it's going to be flipped between the low or the high, depending on whether you're using a low voltage preamp output from like a head unit. That's typically those are in the form of a 4 volt or a 5 volt output, or you'll flip it to the high option if you're going to choose to use your vehicle's OEM speaker signal as the input here, which, and basically all that means is you would take the front speaker wires and then you would run them directly to this unit, to the amplifier, and you'd have to purchase RCA adapters that you'll use to then plug those speaker signal inputs directly into the amplifier. But, you know, and that's in the case that you want to retain the factory head unit, you don't have a DSP or a signal processor, right? This option, this input option, just gives you some flexibility here to use, you know, the factory speaker wire as an input, or if you do have those DSPs, signal processors, or head units, you can use the traditional low voltage input. On the 8 channel down below here, you'll see this additional switch here, this turn on. It's the amp turn on switch. On the 6 channel, you can see it's not here. It's tucked under the control panel. I think that's due to space, probably on the panel itself. But Sony placed this out here on the 8 channel. This just lets you choose whether you're going to use a traditional 12 volt amp turn on wire to tell the amplifier when to turn on and off with your vehicle. You can plug this, you know, when it's selected on the remote option right here, which is to the left, you can use a 12 volt accessory, or, you know, if you have an aftermarket head unit, normally that's indicated by blue and white wire. That's what tells this amplifier to turn on when the head unit does. Or if you did hook it up to just a normal accessory wire on your vehicle, it'll probably come on when your vehicle turns on too. But if you didn't want to wire this up using that kind of traditional 12 volt accessory route, or you didn't want to wire it, you didn't have access to it, you might have a GM vehicle that actually doesn't have easy access to a 12 volt accessory wire, you could actually use this signal option, which is to the right. And what that does is it tells the amplifier to turn on when it senses signal from any of these RCA signal inputs, or in this case, it would be the signals that come into this. As soon as it senses a signal in, it's going to tell the amplifier to turn on. And then you don't have to worry about wiring that 12 volt signal to either of these amplifiers, and both of the amplifiers have this feature. Lastly, while I have the input output panel in view here, you have all the inputs and outputs they're located, everything is located on one panel. There's nothing on the back side of this amplifier. Everything is conveniently located just on one side of the amplifier. Sometimes you'll see the amplifier has the input signals on one side, tuning on that side, and then all the outputs on the other. Sony combined everything into one. Now, these speaker terminal outputs can handle up to an 8 gauge speaker wire if needed, just something to call out. And then the power inputs can handle up to a 0 gauge thickness. They're both rounded out with some stainless steel hex screws that are located underneath the control panel here. And they'll support either a bare wire, you can put the bare wire in here, or you can put wire with ferrules on them. So if you wanted to take the wiring to a step further. So let's talk about the control panel next. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a close-up of the 6 channel amp, because it's virtually the same as the 8 channel, just with 2 less outputs to configure. So I'm going to clear everything off here, flip this around, pull off the cover for you, and then start to review some of the control panel features once I open it up. Okay, I got the 6 channel here in front of us. The first thing I'm going to do is use my Allen to remove the control panel here. So let me go ahead and do that. All right, now that I have the control panel off, you can start to get a look at some of the key features that Sony really describes with these amplifiers. Signal summing, bridging, right? Some of the crossover controls. It might look a bit complex if you haven't looked at an amplifier control panel before. If this sounds like you, I highly recommend taking a look at my written review. It's in the description below of this amplifier, as well as the instruction manual, because those will give you a better visual and you don't have to keep up with me while I'm talking. I'm gonna go ahead and just give a quick summary of where some of these features live on this control panel though. So if I breeze by something that you're interested in hearing more about, again, check out my written article in the description, because it's likely that I'll have some still photos and some more descriptions for you on how some of these work. Starting with the left side here, I already walked through the remote turn on feature a few minutes ago on the 8 channel, because it's actually on the input panel down here. But to the right of this is what drives one of the core features of this amplifier and helps you seamlessly integrate the amplifiers into a factory system. This is called the input mode on the amplifier. It powers the various input options as well as some of the signal summing options. On the amplifier, again, it's noted as input mode. You can see that there are a number of configurations below this, and each of them are outlined to show like which signal input it's going to use and how that signal applies to the outputs. Right, so what this is going to do is tell the amplifier, again, which RCA input you're going to use and how that input is going to apply to the speaker terminal outputs here. So, for example, the far left option is labeled 1 through 6. This is going to use each individual input signal to power the corresponding output. So RCA 1 right here will power the speaker terminal output 1. RCA 2, which is down here, will power the speaker output 2, and so on. So for this option, you literally you need as many RCA inputs as there are channels for this amplifier. In this scenario, it's a 6-channel. The 8-channel, you'd need 8 RCA inputs in order to power all of the outputs that you're going to leverage. This gives you the most granular level of control over each speaker output, but it might not be realistic for you to literally grab or find 8 different RCA inputs for this amplifier, or I should say the 8-channel amplifier, because what you're looking at is the 6-channel. So another option here, and I'm going to switch it into the third option from the left. This is labeled 1 to 2 on this particular amplifier. So if you choose this input, I think this is a little bit more realistic for more use cases. This will use the RC inputs from just the RCA input 1 and 2 here, and it's going to extend those 2 signals across all of the channels on the amplifier. So channel 1, RCA input 1 is going to apply that signal to 1, 3, and 5. Basically, this is your left channels. And then RCA input 2 is going to apply it to 2, 4, and 6. And if this was the 8-channel amplifier, it would be 8, right? And the input 1 would apply it to the 7th channel, right? So it just extends that. And then the final option to the right is the signal summing feature that is noted in the description and kind of the summary and specs of these amplifiers. So it's labeled 1 plus 3 and then 2 plus 4. And what this is going to do is it's going to take the inputs from signal inputs 1 and 3 and then sum those frequencies to output the full range of those 2-channel inputs onto channels 1, 3, and 5. And then it's going to sum the RCA inputs from 2 and 4, and it's going to extend that summed signal to channels 2, 4, and 6. And again, with the 8-channel, it's similar to, but would sum the channel 1 and 3 inputs for the additional 7th channel, and then sum the inputs from 2 and 4 to the additional 8th channel. Signal summing is mainly for integrating these amps, I would say, into factory systems without signal processors, DSPs, head units. It's great for scenarios where you have select inputs to use and might want to combine them to power a more full range speaker. So for example, if you have like one of the newer Broncos with a 3.5 inch speaker in the dash and then a 5.25 inch speaker in the kick panel at your feet, and your goal is to replace those two speakers with a 6.5 inch component system with a 1 inch tweeter. Pretty common use case, I feel like. In this case, you'd probably want to sum the signals from both that 3.5 inch speaker and the 5.25 inch speaker to output a fuller frequency range for those 6.5 inch replacements. So it's good for scenarios like that. But if you have an aftermarket head unit or another source for signal, you probably won't put this to use. The next one over here next to the input mode is the line out selection. So if you wanted to extend your input signal to another amplifier without degrading that signal or loss in voltage, splitting the RCAs, which is the worst case scenario, you can use this line out. And the line out is right here on this amplifier. It's on that harness for the 8-channel amplifier, but you can use this line out RCAs to do a couple things. So one, if you select the through option, which is the farthest to the left, it's going to take the inputs from your 1 and 2 channel inputs here and pass it through untouched. Pretty simple. So these line outs will mirror the line ins for channel 1 and 2. If you select the stereo option, which is the center one here, this is going to sum the frequencies from the channel 1 and 3 and output to the line output channel 1, and then it's going to sum the inputs from 2 and 4 and then output that sum signal in the line output channel 2 here. So another version of summing the signals that this amplifier has natively. The third option is the all, and this will sum all of the frequencies from all of the inputs and then sum that signal onto both 1 and 2 in the line output. So that's like the comprehensive summed frequency from all the inputs into the line output. So this makes extension of your signal pretty easy for secondary or tertiary amplifiers if you didn't want to split your RCAs or something like that, which is again the worst case scenario. You don't want to do that to keep a clean signal. It's worth noting here that in the input selection though, and also the crossover settings, anything that you set in the line input and any of these crossovers, which I'll get into in a moment, those don't impact the output in this line out. So this takes the raw signal that comes in from your inputs and then just passes it through depending on what you select in the line output mode. So the next thing to cover off on here is the crossover sections. For those of you who might be new to amplifier configurations, these 3 sections, and there's a 4th section on the 8 channel, but these sections are identical. They just apply the settings for this respective area to the corresponding group channel outputs, right? So channel 1 and 2, that handles just these outputs. Channel 3 and 4, that handles this. 5 and 6 handles this, right? Pretty simple. I'm just going to go through one of these and I'll make it quick here because crossovers are pretty common, but there's a couple slight differences I've seen with these Sonys that aren't on every other amplifier. Number one, you'll see on the filter section, you have standard, off, high pass, low pass, and then BP, band pass. So these amplifiers, if you select this option, these have band pass filters on each of the crossover networks. So you can set the frequency floor and the ceiling for each output group using the high pass and the low pass filters right here. That's a nice feature, comes in handy with some of those full range speakers in particular. Next to filter though, you have also what's called the range. And this is a setting here that allows you to change the frequency range you'll ultimately be setting with these high pass and low pass filters over here. You can see here on the range, below the range, there are two different background colors. One on the left is 50 through 500 hertz, and this is indicated with the black background. So by selecting this option, it's going to make these high pass filters and the low pass filters operate within the range that you selected, and they're also indicated with the black background on the amplifier dials themselves. This is what you'd use. This 50 through 500 is what you would likely use if you're using one of these channels bridged to power a subwoofer mainly. Then the white background you can see on the range. If I select the white background, this indicates the frequency range of 500 to 50,000 hertz, and that will correspond with the white background on these high pass and low pass frequency dials as well. This is what you'd use for a full range or a mid-range speaker, a mid-high, or even your tweeters. If you choose to bi-amp a setup, or if you individually power your mid-range, your tweeters and so on, you'll probably want to use that higher frequency range because that's what those speakers will operate within. Pretty cool. Gives you some added flexibility for those factory integrated setups that people might use these amps for. So that pretty much sums up the crossovers. The only other thing I'll call out here is the bridged capability that I've talked about, and it's very clearly indicated on this amplifier. You can see this is where exactly to hook up your bridged line outputs for each of the channels. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's in the manual too, but they label everything very clearly on these amplifiers, which is something that I personally like, and something that I could use without necessarily looking at the amplifier manual every single time. So anyhow, that's all I had for you today. I hope I covered everything that you're looking to learn about these two new amplifiers, and maybe even some of the other amplifiers that are a part of the Mobile ES lineup, because they relatively share all of the same functionality. If not, take a quick glance at the written article that I added to the description of this video as well. You'll also find a review of the monoblock and the 5-channel that I've done. I've added some additional detail in the written reviews around some of the features like the input options, signal summing, and so on, with some static images that might make it easier for you to understand. If you like the content that I covered here, do me a huge favor, click on the subscribe below. It helps me bring meaningful videos to my channel and reviewing cool new products as they come out, like these new amps. Thanks for watching.